Well, Eugene Chausovsky is a geopolitical analyst and former senior Eurasia analyst at Stratfor. He joins me live from here in Washington. Good to have you on the program, Eugene.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Now, the stakes of these talks, no doubt, really high, but the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken already has set the bar low, saying he doesn't expect a breakthrough. What's your reading onto how day one proceeded?
Right, yeah, so I don't think that there will be any breakthroughs, either today or probably for the rest of the week, but it is an opportunity for both sides, the US and Russia, and then later in the week joined by other European countries and NATO members, to essentially signal their red lines to one another. And this is really important as we saw Russian military buildups near Ukrainian borders take place in recent weeks. And so this is what the key element here is, not that it's going to produce some major breakthrough or agreement between the two sides, but rather to avert any major destabilization or escalation.
Do these talks seem lopsided? Because Russia appears to hold the cards. It wants NATO to retreat from Eastern Europe in exchange for not invading Ukraine. One, is that realistic? And two, what's the whole strategy here?
Well, I think the strategy from Russia's standpoint is knowing that the US and NATO countries are unlikely to abandon Ukraine entirely or to drop Ukraine's NATO ambitions. It's essentially trying to eke out any kind of compromise. So something that could actually take place, whether at the end of this week or sometime in the near future, is some kind of understanding as far as military exercises or weapons deployments go. So essentially, Russia is trying to entrench its influence and to basically get the West to accede to its demands, but it knows that that's not possible, so it's kind of looking for a middle ground.
Middle ground. But the real extreme case, of course, is war. What's the likelihood of it? Because many fear a repeat of 2014 when Russia annexed yet another part of Ukraine, Crimea.
Right. So I think war or a Russian invasion of Ukraine is unlikely at this point because of the tremendous cost that would come with it. While Ukraine is not a NATO member state, the US and other NATO countries have signaled their support for Ukraine, whether that's in terms of crippling sanctions against Russia or perhaps even ramping up the support for Ukraine that Russia is trying to avoid.
Then, Eugene, really, is Russia trying to extend its sphere of influence, in this post-Soviet world? Because we're not seeing military just on the border with Ukraine, but also Russian troops inside Kazakhstan helping to quell unrest this past week.
Exactly. And that's why I think while an invasion of Ukraine is unlikely, and certainly the Baltic states, which are NATO members, Russia did show a willingness to support countries that are in a sphere of influence, as we saw in Kazakhstan. And I don't think we can rule out some Russian military action or some kind of deployments in other areas such as Belarus or Kaliningrad. So this whole entire sphere is essentially open. And so while eyes are concentrated on Ukraine, there could be a number of different things that Russia does that's short of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, but still very significant.
Okay, so as we look at these talks happening all week, what is the best case scenario in your view?
I think the best case scenario at this point is what I had mentioned earlier, as far as some kind of agreement or at least unofficial understanding to limit the scope of weapons deployments and military exercises along these borderland countries, Ukraine and others that are adjacent to both Russia and the EU. And from there, if some kind of progress can be made, perhaps there's scope for greater security de-escalation in the future.
All right there, Eugene Chausovsky. Thank you so much for your insight.